Hello and welcome to Some Patches Required, a show where we hope to educate and entertain you on the ever-turbulent games industry. As always, I am one of your hosts, Zach.
And I am your other host, Aaron.
And before we jump into the meat and potatoes of it, I just wanted to say thank you to all of the new and returning listeners. We appreciate all of you, and keep on listening. We would really support that decision on your part. It's healthy. We reduce cholesterol levels. It's been proven, not scientifically, but by my great aunt Lisa, who does not exist, and
online testimonials.
And online testimonials. That's true, Aaron. We're working on our FDA.
Well, we're FDA compliant, but that requires no testing.
That is true. That is true. Which is like being compliant, except it's not. Oh, wait. Sorry, that made no sense. Anyway, I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, this podcast now comes with way more protein than before.
And you know what protein means? It means you should like and subscribe. What a transition. What a strong transition. You should like and subscribe or follow or whatever the engagement button is on the specific platform that you have chosen to listen to us on because we love you. I'm tearing up. But no, seriously, please like and subscribe. And don't forget to share us with a friend, or as we like to say, mortal enemy. We accept both forms of support. One day, Aaron, we are going to turn around and learn that our whole community is just a bunch of assholes.
Yep.
I probably shouldn't have said that out loud. I know for a fact you've got friends and family that listen to the show. So if you're one of those people, we love you.
Yeah. And that sort of experiment where you just like place people somewhere that's gone well in the past. What was the entire country that was like formerly a penal colony?
Oh, it's Australia.
Yes, Australia. Australia's great. And that's how that started. So if you just send all of your mortal enemies to our listenership, eventually we will become as good as Australia.
One day, we too can be as strong as the great island nation of Australia. I don't even know if you can call it an island because it's, technically a continent. But anyway, regardless of any of that, today we will be talking about stop killing games, because as always with the games industry, when Aaron and I are trying to find topics, there are these like dry spells where absolutely nothing happens of interest. And then there are the times of plenty, which is like now, where the games industry decides that everything's going to happen at once. It always happens over the summer, mostly. And now it's certainly one of those times.
Yes, that is 100% the case. We our cup runneth over, as it were, in terms of stuff that we could be talking about. But we are going to be talking about the Stop Killing Games movement, which I'm sure does not, set us apart in an incredible way from a lot of people on the internet who are currently talking about Stop Killing Games. Partially, I believe, because there is a little bit of, sort of internet drama to this story now, but we're going to not talk about that too much and sort of focus on what the actual initiative is, how we got to this point with it, what it could mean for the industry at large, generally the stuff that you might expect us to be interested in, and then we will kind of, dip into a bunch of opinions and whatnot later.
But Aaron, I came here to only dunk on Thor, i.e. pirate software. That is my only purpose in life, is to slam dunk on this man with long hair and maybe a fake deep voice.
Yeah, very possibly. I was going to say, though, do I have a surprise for you? Make sure you listen through the whole episode all the way to the end, and we'll get to the part that you crave.
I thought you were going to be like, well, just wait. I've got Thor on the line right now, and it's like,
no.
Oh, boy.
I believe the last time I tried something like that, we ended up with the Michael Caine incident.
Well, that wasn't actually Michael Caine was part of the problem, but
Okay, yeah, that may have been
Yeah.
the one and only flaw with the Michael Caine incident.
yeah, no, I solidly agree with that. Well, I think the area that makes sense with all of this, and we will try to make this as quick as possible for those of you that already know what Stop Killing Games is.
Hello, it is I, Aaron from the future, with a quick important message regarding what Zach just said. Regretfully, we did not keep our recap of the Stop Killing Games movement particularly brief, so if you are already familiar with it, please do feel free to skip ahead to the mark of about 28:52, if I'm not terribly mistaken, based on my math. The actual number is going to be in the timestamps below. So yeah, feel free to hop over to that timestamp if you don't feel like listening to us run through stuff you already know and would rather just hear our opinions and all that fun stuff. All right, bye.
But Stop Killing Games. What is Stop Killing Games? So Aaron and I thought we had a pretty solid understanding of what the movement was, but I told Aaron before we jumped into all of it that I did want to do some deeper digging into the actual petition itself to make sure that we weren't just assuming that we knew what this event was about without actually reading the petition page. But basically, Stop Killing Games is this movement / petition that is being forwarded to both the UK and the European Union. The first paragraph of it, I think, summarizes it pretty well, so I'm just going to read that off real quick. Stop Killing Games is a consumer movement started to challenge the legality of publishers destroying video games they have sold to customers. As an increasing number of video games are sold effectively as goods with no stated expiration date, but designed to be completely unplayed as soon as support for the publisher ends. I realize I suck at reading here. Look, I have dyslexia. I apologize to everyone. This practice is a form of planned obsolescence and is not only detrimental to customers, but makes preservation effectively impossible. Furthermore, the legality of this practice is largely untested in many countries. So as I'm side-eyeing this paragraph and trying to read it out loud, basically it's a consumer movement that is trying to prevent publishers from hitting the I don't want to support this game button, even though the customer has already paid for it. Effectively, a lot of games have online only components, so when a publisher doesn't want to support them anymore and they get rid of that online component, the game is unplayable. Therefore, the product that you purchased is no longer playable, and yeah, I mean, that's kind of the short of it.
Yeah, I mean that is the gist. So a good example there being actually one of the games that kind of kickstarted this movement, this wave was when Ubisoft decided to pull support for The Crew, which did have single player components but was an always online game. And then when they decided they no longer wanted to support the online functionality, even the single-player content became completely unplayable, thus rendering the good that you had purchased completely null and void. It's the sort of thing we talk about all the time with various live service games that, you know, come out, happen, and then die. I think I've lambasted the Square Enix Avengers game a good handful of times. Not that I was exactly jonesing to go back to that experience, but that is another, example of a game that just like they pulled the plug and suddenly that thing that people spent, up to full MSRP on or more with microtransactions is just gone. And this would be a way to try to stop developers, mostly publishers, from actually doing that. And the craziest thing is that this has a real potential to actually succeed. I was gonna say, we'll go through some of like what the initiative would actually do a little bit here in a sec, but Zach, do you want to touch at all on like why legally this is even feasible?
Why legally this is even feasible? Is this a reference to the reasons the ECI could pass?
No, not specifically. More to the existence of the ECI in general.
Well, I mean, here's the reality. When you're looking at the European Union, especially, I'm not as sure about the UK, but the European Union is generally a little bit more consumer or pro-consumer. They have stronger consumer rights in Europe. And so whenever you get an initiative like this to, change something for all of the European market, generally speaking, it can get passed because politicians care about it more. And if it does get passed, it's super neat because it can impact the rest of the world, because Europe is a big enough of a market that the US will likely be impacted, because it doesn't make sense for games to be developed in a certain way for Europe, but not in a certain way but not in a different way for the rest of the world. So I don't know if that's exactly what you were referencing, but I think that's an important part of this is for a lot of this progressive consumer legislation, attacking stuff in Europe is often an effective way of trying to get it passed through, because they have these more, strong consumer protections. And there is a note in here that I think is important from that slide. I know Aaron will go back to this slide and dig into the details a little bit more, but a lot of these protections exist for physical goods. And there are already kind of similar consumer practices out there for these physical goods. So getting them to work for digital, in theory, shouldn't be all that complicated, especially because Stop Killing Games aims to be retroactive. Not retroactive. So it's only things moving forward that are in development that would be impacted, not things that have existed in the past, which does make some of this a little bit of an easier lift.
Yeah, for sure. I mostly meant in very brief that for our listenership that is not in the EU or aware of EU initiatives and whatnot, this entire current Stop Killing Games movement is essentially to sign an EU petition under a new stricture that basically allows large mobilized movements in the European Union to get legislation in front of lawmakers without, all of the bureaucratic red tape that we would expect in America, where it would need to be introduced as this and then brought before this assembly and made into this and that and this and that. The EU basically has a plug-in for, if enough people care about this, we will actually look at it. And that is why when the Stop Killing Games movement began in this form, the goal was to hit 1 million valid signatures across the entire European Union. And there's a couple more interesting little strictures in there. But basically the gist of it is, if there are 1 million valid signatures on this petition, then this motion would be presented in front of European Union lawmakers, which is possibly the best chance that anything like this would ever have to have a non-crappy version put into a very serious situation like this. So basically, if enough people give a shit about games preservation, then this stuff that we're about to read out will actually be put in front of lawmakers, and they will make a decision on it most likely, which is kind of a crowdfunding legislation model, but without the funding. And it's just very interesting that's sort of why this is being taken seriously, is because it's not like a change.org petition rather. It is very much legally actionable. It is more where I was going, just as groundwork before we dig into what the actual initiative is in enumerated bullet points.
I would say, though, it is important to say that it's more, like you said, it gets eyeballs on the initiative. It does not guarantee that anything will be passed. It just illustrates that there is an interest from the larger European community into looking at this consumer protection, basically. Yeah. So, it's very possible that politicians look at it and they're like, we don't give a shit about this. We don't think this is important. Or that politicians get lobbied in the opposite direction and they think that for some reason these consumer protections aren't important. To your point, looking at some of the information here, I actually did want to make a quick comment. I was telling Aaron this. There's a video called Europeans Can Save Gaming. It's by Accursed Farms. I believe Accursed Farms' actual name is Ross online. He's getting referenced like that, so I'm not doxing the man for clarity. But Accursed Farms has a video called Europeans Can Save Gaming. I would recommend you watch that video if you're thinking about signing the petition, because it goes into a little bit more detail about what the initiative is. What I found when I was on the petition page and I was trying to do research here is that, well, actually, sorry, first thing, you can only sign the petition if you are in Europe or in the EU or in the UK. That is very important. If you sign from somewhere else, you're, I wouldn't say directly hurting the movement, but you're not helping. It causes a bunch of issues. Apparently, a bunch of the signatures are probably going to get denied because of people signing from outside of the legal countries. So it is worth noting that.
If you're not a citizen of any EU country, you can't sign this petition. They will invalidate your signature if you sign in using a VPN. I believe you are eligible to vote if you currently reside outside of the EU, but you're still an EU citizen.
That is correct.
So that's not a concern. But if you are not a citizen of any country in the EU, don't sign the petition, but do spread the word if you want to be involved. Because that is the only sort of actionable way that you can do that. Anyway, back to you, Zach.
Well, so I wanted to make that disclaimer early-ish in this conversation. But what I was going to say is I would recommend watching this video because I think, and I was telling Aaron this, the petition does not do a good job of having easy-to-follow bullet points about what this is and is not. The video does a better job of doing that. There are, I think, 3 different slides. 2 of them are the more relevant ones. And I think that looking at those is the best way to really understand what the movement is. So just looking at that, the first comment here about what would the initiative do? It says, require video games sold to customers to be in a reasonable working state at the time of shutdown / end of support. So, the game, I think the reasonable portion of that's really important because it doesn't mean the game needs to be in the exact same state as when it was supported, but it needs to be reasonably playable. I think best effort is often used in legal language, but it's basically the idea that you're not just not putting in any effort to make it be in a playable state. It may not be the same experience, but you're at least trying to make it be a solid product after support. Prohibit any requirements for video games sold to customers to connect to the publisher or affiliated parties after end of support. That's what Aaron and I were talking about earlier. Sometimes there are special authentication logins that you need to go through in order to guarantee that you are connected to the internet or have the game connected to your Ubisoft account or something. There could be any form of authentication here, but if you don't authenticate properly, it could effectively prevent you from playing even single player games. And this is just saying we don't want there to be some kind of a service in place that connects to a game launcher. And if the publisher stops supporting that connection, you suddenly can't play the game. And then the last thing here is require the above also apply to video games that sell game assets or features, and they put microtransactions to customers. So, you have access to all the stuff you bought, basically, even after support ends.
And the sort of crux of the argument there, just to sort of synthesize what all of that specifically means, is, again, to kind of reiterate, they're basically stating that the way that games are currently sold, which is basically as a license, has not really been enumerated to their satisfaction. And what it essentially results in is a product, a good that has been sold to you with no listed expiration date, where the person who sold it to you can revoke your ability to own it at any time, meaning that since there's no end time, it's not a rental. It is a purchased good, a purchased product that can just be taken from you for any reason at any time. And there's really nothing but sort of best practices for how they need to communicate to you that the thing you bought is no longer anything. In very broad terms, that is what the Stop Killing Games initiative is trying to end within the world of video games.
Yeah, I mean, basically publishers and developers have like a kill switch that terminates the product that you purchased. And a lot of the time that is said somewhere in the EULA, but what gets brought up a lot in this movement is that these video games are often sold like physical products. Like if you think about like a Blu-ray DVD, people often think of their video games that they purchase, especially physical copies, in a very similar way. But the reality is even the physically purchased video games, the support can get turned off and then suddenly it's just like a blank disc. Or not even a blank disc. It's not a blank disc. A blank disc might be more useful. It's a disc with data on it that you can't use or leverage. So that's effectively what's getting brought up a lot in this conversation. The next section that I think is important as we try to get through a lot of this is what the initiative would not do. So the initiative would not require publishers to give up all intellectual property rights. It would not require publishers to give up source code. It would not require endless support, so a publisher continuing to support a game in perpetuity. It would not require publishers to host servers. It would not require publishers to assume liability for customer actions. We'll get into that one later because that one's a little bit complicated to it's easier with an example to understand what that means.
Yeah.
And then it says, would not interfere with business practices in any way while a game is still being supported. That basically means if you want to have predatory monetization and weird-ass microtransactions while the game is live, Stop Killing Games is not trying to address how publishers monetize their games. It is simply trying to address end of life and making sure that people have access to the products that they buy when the companies that make the product no longer support it.
Yep. That's it.
Yep. Ultimately, I think all of that, at least at face value, is incredibly reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it almost feels too good to be true in a sense. That these sort of things would actually like happen. But yeah. I without getting too much into the opinion while we still have some stuff to go through. Yeah. I think, despite the fact that it is admittedly very broad in terms of what they're proposing, although that is in line with what is required of an initiative at this phase of sort of like mobilizing the public under EU law, they don't need to be more specific than they already have been. And I think this, as a bullet point list of goals, is, reasonable and good. Not to say that it is, completely without complication, because it's not. But I think that at the very least, these are sort of really solid aspirations.
I think the way that you just put that is a really important thing, right? Like, this is not law. This is a petition that illustrates what consumers would like to see when it comes to protections of their digital product, which in this case would be video games. And so what this is saying is these are all the important things that we think you need to take into consideration. These are all the complicated things that we don't like. We're not trying to limit what studios and publishers do when it comes to like these different bullet points, right? So I think that's the important thing here is a lot of people are being really, really critical of the movement for being potentially too vague, for being unrealistic. I think that a lot of that doesn't quite matter because it's not the law. The law is whatever the EU decides to, put into legislation after they see this petition. This is just a petition saying we don't want people taking away our digital products when they end of life them. We want there to be some kind of a plan for how this product gets supported, whether that's like community run, whether that's you disconnecting all of the online components so that it's in a playable state, post support. This is not the law. Like, we can't be overly critical of this initiative because I think, to get to the root of it, I support this idea. We've talked about games preservation on the show a few times, Aaron. And I think this would be a pretty solid step towards preserving the future of games in a lot of ways. And also, we've expressed our issues with always online games or games as a service before. And I think one of the big ones is the game goes away when the publisher, the developer, whoever it is, decides to just can it. Like, I don't know anyone that was a massive fan of Concord, but hypothetically, someone could have been. And as far as I know, if you were a fan of Concord, you're kind of fucked right now. And I know Concord's a big meme, but it is the most recent example of something coming out and then just being like wiped. I think Anthem recently came out as being soon EA's going to completely put the kibosh on that. So like there's another example.
Yeah, weirdly, I even think Anthem's a better example than Concord, because at least with Concord, everybody was refunded. That's the thing. Like, that is the core difference between what I think is a legally defensible and also a morally defensible position in this and what is not, which is to say, you bought this as a good, as a product, and now we're just like, and you can never interact with it again. Thank you so much for the $60. That'll be nice for me. Thank you. At least with Concord, they recognized that they were going to lose money and reputation and whatever, and they just didn't want to deal with the mess, so they gave everybody their money back. I'm fine with that as a product recall, especially considering it was only on the market for, a very short period of time. It is more the stuff that people purchase. It's past any sort of return policy. It's not like they're going to give everybody their money back for every live service game that's ever been, right? So Anthem is a phenomenal example of that. Not that I think Anthem has a particularly thriving player base. To be honest with you, I didn't even realize that the servers were still up for Anthem. I thought those went down a couple of years ago, but it is just gone now.
Well, I also think Anthem's kind of a funny, better example in the sense of, like, I even enjoyed the art style and some aspects of the game quite a bit, and I think that there are components of Anthem that are actually genuinely unique and good and positive, and I think most people would mostly just dunk on Concord. So I think Anthem's a better example from even having fans potentially as well.
I can say there have been times after, so I bought Anthem at launch and I played it and it wasn't good, but it does have, like, there are good parts to Anthem, right? And there are a couple of things to kind of cling onto in that experience that make it worth, in my opinion, actually having the ability to revisit that world, right? Because flying around in a javelin is fun. The gunplay is fun. Everything else about the game is kind of a mess. I mean, visually, it's lovely to look at. There's a lot of great design elements. There's some cool stuff, but as a whole collective package, it is a complete mess. But can I see myself on any given random day being like, man, just mindlessly flying around in Anthem kind of sounds fun? Yeah. It is absolutely a game that I have revisited for that purpose at least once or twice since it came out. Never stuck with it for very long. There's nothing to do. but it just to have that completely gone is, I mean, it's, if nothing else, it's a piece of history dead, but it's also just like irritating as a consumer, someone who did buy the game, to know that is now just a disc that I have that no one will ever ask me about. And if I do, I'll be like, oh, it's a game that they killed back in the 2020s.
Yeah, I mean, I think... So one of the things I want to make sure we get into around this is I think we spent quite a bit of time running through what Stop Killing Games is. Honestly, Aaron, maybe so much time that we want to put a disclaimer at the beginning of the episode that's like, if you already know what this is, maybe skip to this point.
Yeah, very possibly.
Because I'm sure a lot of the people that would be tuning into this probably already know what it is. So regardless, I want to get to the point where we're talking about some of the more recent news, which is that Video Games Europe, which is, of course, a lobbying entity for video games in Europe, had an announcement talking about the Stop Killing Games movement. But I think before we get into that, it is important that I ask you, what are your thoughts on Stop Killing Games kind of generally from, I mean, I guess kind of a macro perspective?
From a macro perspective,
what are the vibes?
So for me, I mean, like, in terms of games preservation angle, I'm in, right? I think that one of the regrets, I mean, like, looking back at any other industry where preservation just wasn't considered at the time, the old film industry, there's so many films that have either taken, decades of insanely hard work to like reconstruct into a facsimile of what they would have been like originally, for study, for artistic appreciation, any given other reason. Looking at those industries, it's a shame that they did not take preservation seriously, because there's just so much lost knowledge and art and fascinating stuff. And to see that happening with the games industry, but purely out of essentially greed, doesn't sit well with me. I think the transition to a digital only landscape makes that even more complicated, and always connected landscape makes that even more complicated. But from a games preservation perspective, if this can work, I think that's great. I do think that there are a lot of challenges that I think some of the slightly broad framing of the initiative is almost doing itself a favor at this point by being so broad, because the nitty-gritty of figuring out what is to be expected on a game-to-game basis is going to be really hard work. And it's not to say that it will be, in any way easy necessarily for game makers and publishers to enact changes to be in line with legislation around this movement. But I think it has to be worth it to try. I think it's better for consumers. I think it's better for history. And I think, honestly, if it comes out right, then it's better for the industry.
I think the important thing to realize when it comes to the feasibility of this is, again, that this is not a retroactive change. I'm not saying this so much to you, but I even find myself falling into this pit of, I'm like, well, what about all these games that exist now? Some of them might be hard to change. And it's like, okay, well, they don't need to change. So really, this is a forward-facing initiative. So it's here to change the way that people will think about game development and supporting games in the future for future titles. This is not for titles that exist now. And I think that's an important thing for a lot of people to think about, because you can people do develop around the laws that exist now. Like, there are gambling laws, especially in the EU, about what you have to disclose, what you can and can't do when it comes to microtransactions and purchases. These are things that are always evolving, that all industries, especially games, in the context of what I just said, have to adapt to. And so this is not... It may mean that games in a certain context cannot be made in the way that they are now, but that might be okay. And honestly, as someone that works in video games in the back-end services side of things, I can't think of anything that, like, you would need... Like, it's being largely overblown what could and couldn't be done without some of the online services. And also, like I said, Aaron, we've talked about games as a service. If we took a step back from games as a service and we stopped having so many kind of shitty online games because of this legislation, I'm gonna be honest, I don't think I give a shit. I just don't think I can be bothered, because a lot of these online tools have been put in place to extract wealth from players in kind of a malicious, hollow way, at least in my opinion. And I just don't care. Like, if you want to make a shitty slop game and you can't do it anymore, I'm sorry, bud. I have no sympathy for you. And I realize I'm being really vague in this moment and I could be way more specific, but basically what I mean is I think a lot of games as a service games are just kind of shit, and I don't care if they're not viable because you can't make them like supported for end of life. I have zero sympathy for you. Like I'm just going to be real honest.
Yeah, I think it would be a slightly different conversation, and it's not to say that there's a lack of passion on any of those teams. I'm sure that the people in the trenches really do care about the products that they're making, the projects that they're working on. But I would say there's a difference to me between a team of developers who go into making networked games because it is something that they are genuinely passionate about, right? Like it is the form of the game that they find the most interesting. They find some unforgettable nugget inside of the social element of video games, and they tap into the power of connectivity in order to make that work. They create a game world, and it exists only online. I would hate to see somebody with that level of passion for games specifically made that way be unable to do so in the future because of legislation. But two things. One, I don't think that's the case with most of the live service games that we end up talking about. I'm sure that that sort of mentality definitely exists, but I don't think it exists at a high level in the people making decisions about games like Concord and Anthem. I then think also that prohibiting those games from being made is, of course, not the purpose of this initiative from the jump. If anything, it potentially gives very, very smart tools developers a chance to develop plugins and tools to sort of like help bifurcate a game from its only online status. I wouldn't be sad to see always online single player games go away forever, because that sort of thing just drives me absolutely apeshit. But yeah, I mean, if there's some runoff to this that limits the entry for even just like, I don't know, if we see fewer crap games as a result, I won't be upset, but I also don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. In terms of that perspective entirely, I guess.
Well, it's more that I know that you can make a lot of the games that exist right now, and they will be just as feasible and financially successful in the future, even if you have to have a backup plan to support a game. The reality is that the games that people are thinking about and they're like, oh my God, how would we even go about architecting this to like fit stop killing games? Those games exist now, and they were made in a different context where there was not an expectation of needing to support the game after it was end of life. So in the future, when you architect engineers are not stupid people. Like people can figure this stuff out, and may it be expensive for a point in time, maybe, but you know what's going to happen if this legislation comes out is there are going to be probably entire companies that try to make products to help with end-of-life support.
Guaranteed.
To make it so that your source code doesn't have critical like infrastructure in it that could lead to security vulnerabilities for your other projects and whatnot. Like someone is going to step in to accommodate this change from like a commercial perspective. Sorry, you were saying something.
No, I was cutting you off, but I got excited because I was like, that's exactly what I meant when I was talking about tools programmers. Like, opportunity is the mother of invention, right? So like, give somebody a challenge to work around that, oh, by the way, can be monetized on the back end of an industry. Yeah, people are going to do that. Someone is going to start developing tool sets to like streamline this process. Again, not to say that that's going to be easy, and not to say that implementing it's going to be easy, and not to say that it won't have any effect on the actual game's design or like how the game itself is programmed. But yeah, give it a couple of years and there will be out of the box solutions for a lot of the initial hurdles. Just because that's how this industry works. People don't leave fruit on the tree. When there's something to be figured out, they'll figure it out.
And I truly, so I don't know if it was the Yangya video that I watched or if it was, I think it may have even been the Lioness. I don't know what their podcast name is. I just know it's LMG Clips, but the Lioness Tech Tip guy. Regardless, I think a game existing even after its end of life can only help you. Because if I went to a publisher, I went to any of those entities and I was like, would you like to run this game forever for free? I don't know anyone that would be like, no, I want to kill it. Like, I just want it to die.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't hurt your IP for the game to exist in perpetuity. If anything, it helps it because someone might fall on it. Someone might like retro games or something and they fall, they find your weird title from like 2000 or something, right? And then they start playing it and they're like, oh my God, like there's like 20 of these games that exist or something. I don't know, right? But my point is that this is literally not even bad for corporations. It is a short-term inconvenience for publishers and game devs because it's something they don't need to do now that they will need to do. And I think Yangya has a really good point where he says, doing the right thing isn't always convenient. I would actually add on to that and say, doing the right thing almost is never convenient. There are very rarely is the right thing ever the convenient choice as well. And so I think his video is really interesting because he dives into that a lot. But also, I think he makes the strong case that digital products have a weird exception in terms of how they're treated when compared to physical products. Because physical products, if someone could just like detonate your computer because the graphics card you have is no longer supported or something, that'd be wild.
Yeah.
Like if someone like broke into your house and just ripped it out of your computer because it was, it's end of life now. You can't have this. Upgrade.
Upgrade now.
Yeah. It's like, this is a funny thing I think about like the modern world is how we understand like violence and how we understand all these different things. But not that this is necessarily violence, but like if you think about it kind of from a theft perspective, and Yangya brings up this a lot, is that if someone came in and physically took the copy of your Halo game or whatever game, right? Like you would understand that as theft. But if someone kind of breaks it on the digital end, we don't see it in the same way. And so I invite people to, kind of think about that. And even if you think all of this is protected because they have some comment in their EULA that says, like, you technically don't own this game, I would invite those people to be like, well, why should that be the case? Like, why is that okay that we don't own it? I would argue it's not. I would argue we should own it when that's how it's framed to you when you purchase it. They don't have a thing on the game that's like, this is a lease.
Yeah. If so, I would, in an ideal world, in a very completely ideal world, I would like to see this initiative make waves. I would like to see ownership return to being ownership, and I would like, I would like people to stop killing games. But as a consolation prize, I would at least take very clear, very, very, very abundantly clear branding and advertising centered around the fact that you don't own the game. Regardless of how you buy it, you don't own it. If they're going to make that the only way that this works moving forward, then it needs to be abundantly clear to consumers. And I mean like sickeningly abundantly clear. Because at least right now when you're on Netflix, you do recognize that you're renting Netflix month to month. As long as you maintain that subscription, you have access to what you have access to. That's just not part of the agreement, like overtly with video games, right? So, if they were willing to completely change the way that they talk about game and maybe not even call it sales because you're not buying it, because you don't own it, then yeah, I mean, there's a conversation to be had about that. But I don't know. I would still like to see ownership be ownership. That would be kind of nice for me.
Yeah. Well, I think the one thing that touches on most of the notes, and I referenced earlier, is there's so much content when it comes to this that I'm just now realizing we're just not going to get through all of it, which is fine because a lot of it revolved around drama. So we'll just skip out on all the fun tidbits about drama. But let's just say the movement has been out for about a year. It was not doing particularly well for a long period of time. And then it's just kind of skyrocketed. And as a result of that, we've started to see some statements from various lobbying groups, like I mentioned, Video Games Europe. And Video Games Europe had a statement that they put out. It's because Europeans are weird. I looked at the date and I'm like, wait a minute, this came out in like April. But it didn't. It's because Europeans do it differently than us. Or rather, we do it differently than Europeans.
Yes.
I think this statement is very interesting, Aaron, because I'm going to be real honest with you. I think it looks pretty fucking weak. First of all, they start off the statement by basically saying that legislation proposed by Stop Killing Games, which again, it is not legislation. It is just fixes that they would like to see. There is no law around it. We don't know what the law would look like yet. It's just, please look into this, government. But they are claiming that online experiences would no longer be commercially viable. That's a load of horse shit. And also, to my earlier point, if you want to make shitty games as a service games that can only exist online, I'm not going to be particularly bummed if you can't do that again. That is a me thing. I'm not putting that on you, Aaron. But regardless, I think that's a bullshit statement. I know how much servers cost because I literally work with customers and their server infrastructure. It can be expensive, but also it can be not very expensive. So, I just think that that's kind of a load of bullshit.
I agree, and I will pile on that there is an argument to be made that releasing the code necessary to allow people to privately host servers to extend the lifespan of the game, thus removing any sort of financial imperatives from your situation, that's no longer that's no longer an issue of commercial viability, rather.
Yeah, I mean, what I hear when they say that is they're basically like, we would have to spend so many dev resources to make sure that we have a backup plan for when our game goes end of support. And it's like, I don't think that you would, because you would develop from the beginning knowing that you would need to support it end of life. Again, it's like they're assuming we're talking about games that exist now, which is not the case. If it is truly going to be retroactive, it is future games. People can save a lot of money when they know what they need to expect with development. Mm-hmm. And so, again, I think this is a really weak initial statement from them. So I think that's weak. They go on to say that private servers are not always a viable alternative option for players, as there are protections we put in place to secure players' data, remove illegal content, combat unsafe community content that would not exist and would leave rights holders liable. Basically, every video that I have seen that comments on this does not understand what they're talking about. I don't think that Overwatch characters being ripped out of the video game and used for porn makes Blizzard liable for whatever weird shit people decide to do with their characters. Now, they may not want their characters to be used in porn, and that's valid, but I don't think Blizzard is liable for what people do with their game assets if they rip it from the game itself. And additionally, there's been a lot of comments that I've seen. It's like, put it in the damn EULA if you're that worried about it. That when this game goes end of life, we are not liable for any experience you have while interacting with this online service or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's just wrong as far as I can tell. Private servers are not a viable alternative. That's really hard to say because it just depends on the game. They certainly are a viable alternative for some things. Really what I learned from watching the Linus video, or not learned, but I didn't think about it. You can't normally share source code directly because you might have like some authentication keys or secret keys or just API calls, SDKs, etc. that are leveraged in the source code, and sharing it directly could open you up to security vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not super simple to just share source code, but again, it's not retroactive. So if you know that you have to support it in the future, you could develop source code in a way that would be easier to, clean up when you needed to share it with a community.
Yeah. Completely valid.
Yeah, and then the last thing, it's like many titles are designed to be ground up online only experiences. In effect, this proposal would curtail developer choice by making these video games prohibitively expensive to create. I think this is a weak point because I could argue that there are certain games I couldn't make now because they are like prohibitive from a monetary perspective or like a time perspective. Like I don't think that's a strong use case personally. It's like, oh no,
Yeah.
these things will be too expensive. And again, I also just do not believe that is the case. I think that is just them saying that it's the case. And I find this all to be even more offensive, Aaron, when like game studios are trying to roll out AI, which they see as this massive like cost saving mechanism, but that's a completely different tangent. So
Yeah. No, I completely agree. It is frustrating to see such insane cost cutting followed by, oh, it's too expensive to protect the consumer. Yeah, I don't know. I think in terms of saying that it's prohibitively expensive to make a game like that, I'm slightly sympathetic to developer choice in the sense that if you do find somebody who has all that passionate stuff that I talked about earlier, and then they're like, well, but I'm hamstrung by this, that, or the other thing, then yeah, I suppose that could theoretically be an issue. But in general, I think it's not like making an MMO is cheap to begin with, right? And making an online game, I think maybe they're confusing the idea that like suddenly you'd have to develop like an entirely different game to make it a single player focused game with a whole new progression system. And that's not what anyone's asking for. We're not asking for somebody to cross-develop two games simultaneously, one for the end-of-life terms that's single-player focused, and one for the main monetizable lifespan of the game that's multiplayer focused. That would be crazy. Again, we're not talking about something on that scale, so I would be interested to see the numbers on how prohibitively expensive it would be to plan ahead for sunsetting a game elegantly instead of just pulling the plug on it. But in the meantime, I'm not necessarily buying that it would be like such a big deal that it would tank the industry or stop games from getting made in the first place.
Yeah, I'm not convinced by that argument ultimately because I see the cost of certain machines and we're talking like hundreds of dollars a month, depending on how many you have. And it's like, sure, that may not support all the players that want to play a game, but that's not really your problem. Sorry, I went on a different tangent. That's not actually really super relevant because that'd be more like a post support. My point here is servers are not that expensive, but I saw a connection in my brain that wasn't really there to the point that you were making, so I apologize about that. But
No, you're good.
what I will say to the point that you were just making is I think it might be important to mention an example of a game that Linus talks about that did kind of successfully end of life itself. I didn't know about this game, but apparently there is a game called Supreme Commander. I don't know when it came out. I did not write that down, but it is an RTS game that went end of life. And the game developers ended up basically giving stewardship of the online service component of the game to the community. And so apparently the community manages the matchmaking, they manage the custom map creation, they manage community chat and all of these different online services. And they also apparently have a way to authenticate whether you've bought the game on Steam or not. So the developer can continue to make money, and players can continue to play this game online. And I think that's super neat. So if you want to check it out at some point, if you're listening, if you look up Forged Alliance Forever, it'll take you to the website for this game, at least like the online portion. But Linus brings up the good point of the best way to handle this, I think, would be to give the community stewardship of your game. I'm not saying that's easy. I'm not saying that I know what all the mechanisms to do that are, but I am saying that I think that is the best way to try and handle this, is to put out resources publicly, like on a public GitHub or something, that let people make their own communities to steward your game into the future.
Yeah. People are surprisingly good at organizing around stuff like this. And the community for any given game, especially if it's been around for a little while, can be absolutely the most passionate you've ever seen. So there are people who will absolutely give their time to keep even the most niche thing on the planet alive. And they won't expect a financial return on it. They'll just do it for the love of the game, quite literally.
No, I agree. And I think that you build a more passionate player base when they have to support a game like that. There's plenty of games out there. I'm thinking of like Warhammer, Online, Age of Reckoning, which there's a private server called Return to Reckoning. And granted, I don't think any source code was shared for that. I think that people have basically had to develop their own server-side code to make the game function. But like, it's a great example of how passionate people can be for some of these online games that are no longer supported. Like for this Warhammer game, I think that there are player-made like entire expansions that they've come out with, and like new people go hard for some of this stuff. It can be absolutely wild. I know that WildStar, another MMO that I really appreciate, people are trying to bring it back in some kind of a private capacity. So like, communities are willing and interested in doing this and keeping their games alive. It's just a matter of working on tools to make that transition easier. I don't know that we have those tools now, but I do think it's worth investing in that. I think the biggest thing that I would, just looking at the time here, I would like to end on is probably, from my perspective, I don't think it's feasible for us to expect legislation that forces a company to leave servers up or to constantly support all of these online services in perpetuity. I don't know that you can really force companies to have to lose money on a project forever. But I do think that this is an important initiative to at least start the discussion at the like government, legislative, consumer protections level, because there is certainly more that we can do to protect the future of games and protect consumers moving forward. Again, I don't know what this is going to look like. Ultimately, this is just bringing it to the attention of the EU that this is something people care about. But I think that's a solid first step. And I can't be overly critical of any of this because we don't even know what it's going to look like when it gets implemented.
Yeah.
And I think from a conceptual level, it's very reasonable, and I generally support the idea that it's trying to promote.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. On an idea level, I think this thing is rock solid. I think the fact that it, has managed to thus far, and we'll see what the final numbers look like when the actual like closing of the poll happens and all of these signatures are validated or invalidated respectively. I think that's when things will get really interesting, and odds are we'll end up covering this again at some point. But as it stands right now, from an idea perspective, I'm all the way in. I think that it is good for games preservation. I think that's something that the industry is very actively working against, and it's not just the games industry. I think media preservation in general is in a complete crisis right now. Physical media sales are declining to the point of non-existence, meaning all you are left with are these licenses, and the only artifacts of this media exist in the hands of the people who want to dole it out to you explicitly on their own terms, right? So there is a crisis of preservation. This would go a long way towards putting that control, at least in some small way, back in the hands of the people who actually care about it, not just the people who want to profit on it and then throw away the empty husk when they're done squeezing money out of it. I think it's good for consumers, if for no other reason than it more explicitly enumerates to what you are entitled as a consumer. It definitely more clearly defines the relationship between you and the person you're purchasing something from. I think that could have broader implications for industries outside of video games. I think that, by and large, there are definitely going to be a lot more hurdles for this idea to cross as it gets closer to, an actionable plan or even real legislation. But as it stands, if this is not a beautiful example of fighting the good fight, I do not know what is. I'm sure that even if it does come through, there will be caveats, there will be codicils, there will be little tweaks and changes, and it won't come out in a pristine form. But to get it as far as it has gotten, and to give this a real chance at making an industry-wide change, because to speak to what you were saying earlier, Zach, I think that if this passes in the EU, we will see, at the very least, ripples of it, echoes, across the entire global gaming space. And I think these are good things to aim for, even if we can't achieve all of them. By and large, I think this is a very positive development.
I agree. Well,
Thank
I think
goodness.
on that note, we have some thank yous, and in specific, Aaron has a bit of a shout out for something that isn't one of our normal end notes. So I guess, Aaron, I'll give you the floor to shout out that project. Yes.
So this one is actually quite exciting for me. And I will keep it extremely brief because I know we're going a little long here. So thank you for listening this far, if you've listened. If you are familiar with the show, you might remember pretty early on, my brother Daniel did a bunch of guesting on the show. He is the mind behind that's a fun little rhyme. It just amused me this morning. He is the mind behind the Godzilla novelization project, which was and is a plan to take all of the Godzilla films that don't have official adaptations and write novelized adaptations of them. And he has managed to create a pretty dedicated online following for that project, which has leveraged itself into several opportunities. And it is now my exciting honor to tell you that he is releasing a book, not a novelization of a Godzilla film, but a history book, essentially, called G Cinema, an exploration and celebration of Japan's Monster King. That is basically a coffee table book, kind of going through the history of Godzilla films, some of its cultural significance. It's got fun little behind the scenes bits, lots of great pictures, all I believe curated from my brother's collection of Godzilla materials. And essentially it's something that he's been super passionate about for really a long time, for the majority of the time that I've known the man, and that's been all of my life. And he has finally gotten to the point where a publisher reached out to him, and he's going to be releasing this book. So if you have any interest in learning about the history of Godzilla, specifically in the films, and reading it from the perspective of an extremely passionate and articulate young man, check out, again, that's G Cinema, an exploration and celebration of Japan's Monster King. Or you can most likely find all the information you need by looking for the Godzilla Novelization Project or the GNP on basically any of your favorite social media platforms except for TikTok. Thank God. But yeah, please feel free to give that a look.
And I would like to say thank you and tell you to check out Mosscat Market. Mosscat Market, as always, has helped us with our general art style, of course, our podcast logo, album art, whatever I decide to call it on the specific day. Make sure to check her out at Mosscat Market on both Etsy or on Instagram.
Yes, indeed. Good stuff all around. And then when you're done with that, or maybe if you're perusing the various offerings on Mosscat Market or pondering your interest in Godzilla cinema, and you're like, man, it's quiet in here. I need some tunes. May I suggest the tunes of Beach Girl, who did, of course, provide our wonderful intro and outro music. On top of that, they have a pretty robust library of great tunes that you can find anywhere. That I'm just going to keep using the word tunes because I think I've already done it 20 times. Anywhere you can find those on the internet, you can find Beach Girl. So places like SoundCloud, Bandcamp, YouTube, Spotify, all of the major ones and a handful of the minors. They all have Beach Girl, and you should put some of it in your ears. Let it be your accompaniment through the day.
Heck yeah. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. We appreciate you. And until next time, have a good rest of your day, week, weekend, etc. Life.
Indeed. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
If you just send all of your mortal enemies to our listenership, eventually we will become as good as Australia.